Stop me before I kill you.
Well, we're back. And at least we have something to celebrate today on this January 15th. And we did last year, too. It was just overshadowed by something else, which we don't need to refer to right now. I think some of the other speakers might. But today is Martin Luther King's birthday, and we have that to be very happy about, that that man was born and that he taught us some lessons in his life. Unfortunately, not all the lessons have been learned yet, and we still have some work to do, which is why we have to keep getting back together and look at each other and remember that and walk together so we can get rid of the injustice and the oppression that still exists in our world, in our own community, in our homes. And we have some wonderful people here today to help share that news on how maybe we can get rid of some of the injustice and some of the oppression. But we're going to have to keep coming back together and doing it together, because it's in the people where we're going to have our power. We can't wait for our government to do it. We have to do it ourselves, because oppression lives and we must get rid of it. And the teachings of Martin Luther King will help us along that trail. I'm going to have somebody pass this box around. It's a small group, but looks like a really financially secure group. And we'll pass whatever we get in this box today down to the food bank, Missoula Food Bank, for those that are less fortunate than us. So whatever you can give, that would be a nice, generous donation. So thank you for that. Without further ado, I just want to get the speakers going. There's some great people here afterwards. If you have something to say, we're going to open this mic up for you to share your thoughts with the rest of us. So let's start, and glad to have Robert Des Freeman here to talk to us. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Can y'all hear me? Okay, good. Well, first of all, I'd like to start off by thanking the Lord that I'm able to come here today and speak to you like this. And secondly, I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself and of BSU, Black Student Union, for showing up today as well. And I also want to throw out that don't be scared. You know, the Black Student Union is not only black people, it's many different people, many different cultures who just want to help bring things together. So please don't be afraid to show up for any of the meetings or anything, okay? Now, when I was writing this speech, I was thinking to myself what I would name it if I was going to name it. And I think that I would name it, after a long consideration, a new way of thinking. Because hopefully that's what I'm going to give to you today, a new way of thinking. And I'd like to start off by saying that Dr. King was a great man. He was a man who not only worked for the betterment of black people, but the betterment of all people. Any race, any creed, any gender. Am I lying? Thank you. Now, Dr. King had a dream, and every year right around this time, I hear people come up and they talk about that dream. I hear them on the radios, I hear them on the TV, in the papers, in the newspaper. And the question that I have here today for you is, do you have a dream? And do you share that same dream that Dr. King had? You know, we always say, Dr. King had a dream. Brothers and sisters, Dr. King lives in our memories, in our hearts, but Dr. King is gone, but we're still here. And it's up to us. It's up to what we have inside of us to keep that dream alive and to keep it going. When I look out at people, I always wonder, What kind of people am I looking at who watch the programs on Dr. King and who come to events like this on Dr. King? And I have to wonder, I only see two kinds of people, and those are the kinds of people that every year come and turn the TV sets and watch it or read the papers or come to events like this. And then when it's over with, just walk away and not really care or remember until the next year. Just kind of put it in the closet. Wait around to the next time to start thinking of Dr. King and start thinking of the dream again. Or are you the kind of person that lives it? Because the way I see it, you know, there are 365 days in a year. And it's going to take 365 days every year to keep Dr. King's dream alive. Not just once a year or a couple days or a week. It's going to take every year, all year, with it in your mind and in your heart, if you really want to keep it alive. But if you're just faking and just come around, then I believe that if you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. When I hear Dr. King speak, I hear a man, a great man, who seemed to be saying to me, and hopefully to you, I'm not going to be around forever. I'm not going to be here forever. How can you count on me forever? You can't. You've got to learn something from me. You've got to take what you can learn, and you go on and teach that to someone else, and hopefully they'll go on and teach that to someone else, and it'll just keep going like a domino effect, and we'll get something accomplished here. I don't see Dr. King saying, oh, well, you know, I'm out here and I'm going to do this all on my own, and I'm not going to have anybody's help, and when I pass on, it's all going to be finished, because it's not finished. Not at all, and I'm sure we all know that, and that's why we're here today. Not only to give homage, but to also remember that it's not done. The work is not finished. You know, I've been approached by different people throughout my career speaking and writing, and they ask me, you know, what would you think, Des, if Dr. King was alive today? What do you think that he would say if he'd look around today, if he could just step back on the earth today and take a look around? That's a pretty rough question, I think. But the answer I come up with is that I think that he'd applaud the progress we've made as far as the black-white situation, the relationships, and some of the laws that have been passed. But I also think, and why I say this is because I believe that these are things that we also need to be aware of. And I can start off with our history books. Black history is the history that's been omitted from the textbooks. We don't have a history. We have Booker T. Washington, great man. And then we have a void on up to about Martin Luther King Jr. There's no history inside of there. And one thing we've got to be thinking of is, how can a people ever know what they can be if they don't ever know what they were? And that is a very big problem in society today. I also think, of course, he'd say something, a lot of things about the inner city and about gang violence going on today. People killing each other off for the color of a rag. The drug problem I think he'd have a lot to say about killing everybody off. You know, I once heard Richard Pryor say that Jim Brown came over to his house when he was having a serious drug problem. And Jim Brown asked him, because Richard Pryor was doing drugs in front of him, he said, well, what you doing? And Richard Pryor said, I'm freebasing. And Jim Brown said, well, what's so free about it? And that's the way I see all of the drugs. That's another thing we need to look at, you know, because that's something that not only we had to face, but our generations to come are going to have to face. And being on that for a moment, you know, we see right now how tough it was coming up. Right now is when we can start doing something about that. Right now, not tomorrow. Because tomorrow you're not going to remember how tough it was to grow up. I think you'd also have a lot to say about South Africa. A lot of people today forget about Africa. Africa was where the start of life was. Take any anthropology class and you find that out. My question is how, if you forget about the roots, can you remember the tree? Everybody catch that? Good. Things that we need to be aware of, things that we need to be bringing up today. Because we are the future. You know, we're the ones who's going to be running America. And in order to do that effectively, we're going to have to start thinking properly, a new way of thinking today. Not tomorrow, because there is no tomorrow. I can walk out and get hit by a truck right now. You do for yourself today so that you can have it tomorrow. People, and this is a day I think also to remember that people all over the world are struggling. It's not just a black-white situation. It's the woman-male situation. It's the older-younger situation. It's all kinds of situations and people are having struggles with today. And we got to remember all of them. And think about all of them because, see, nobody's clean. You know, we're all dirty. And we all got a part in it. So don't think you're clean because you're not. I think today's also a day to remember other people who have died over their struggles, such as Dr. King, of course, Malcolm X, Gandhi, President Kennedy, and also people who are still struggling today, like Nelson and Winnie Mandela, Louis Farrakhan, and even myself, and you. And I want you to know that I hope you, but I don't know about you, but I hope that you will continue to struggle, because I will, for the rest of my life, because I see the problems and I won't be blinded. Not by anybody, not by the powers that be, not by media, not by anyone or anything. I'm going to see. And I will continue to do something about what I see. And I hope that you will do the same. I want to end with a quote from Dr. King. He said, "America is essentially a dream. It is a dream of a land where men of all races, of all nationalities, and of all creeds can live together as brothers. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Keep it in your hearts, brothers and sisters. I love you.
No, it's fine. Yeah. Hi, my name's Molly, and I'm interim program director at the Jeanette Rankin Peace Resource Center, while Pat Ortmeyer is on a sabbatical for a few months. And I'm supposed to talk about the peace dividend. Where is it? Which should be a short talk, but before I start, I want to say that I looked for somebody who could talk about this today who had more of an economic background than me, because I don't have one. And I couldn't find anybody who could do it, and so I decided I'll research this and I'll do it myself. And what I found in the last few days has shocked and frightened me and angered me and left me with lots of questions. So I want to share this information with you, and maybe together we can come up with some answers. What does the peace dividend mean? The Cold War is over, but you wouldn't know this by looking at the budget and plans of the Department of Defense of the United States. Our plans for nuclear war with the area of the world that was the Soviet Union remain essentially unchanged. The Cold War structure of the military establishment remains virtually unaltered. We've heard promises in Congress that fiscal year 1993 will be the year to cut defense. But while the administration's request for Star Wars funding was cut back by $1 billion, funding for Star Wars was still allowed to increase from $2.9 billion to $4.15 billion. The peace dividend is that amount of money cut back from defense budgets due to the breakdown of the Cold War that could be funneled into social programs like education or health care. Even at our currently low level of reductions, we could be rerouting $50 to $100 billion a year from the defense budget by fiscal year 1995. So why aren't we? We live in a militarized society. Billions of dollars are being spent to ensure that our military, and I'm using our very, very loosely here, can attack what was the Soviet Union while simultaneously being able to mount interventions elsewhere in the world. Even with the current cutbacks in the number of active divisions in the Army and the Navy, the Pentagon is left with the ability to fight the equivalent of 2 1/4 Iraq-scale wars while maintaining immense strategic nuclear forces. Why? We're given a lot of excuses from the government about the peace dividend that add up to myths. We're told that further cutbacks will cause a loss of jobs, which in turn will negatively affect the economy of this country. The Pentagon said that closing the 100 military bases that were converted to civilian reuse between 1961 and 1990 forced 93,000 people out of work. This is true. But what they don't say is that the same closings created 158,000 jobs in the conversion. Most of the conversions required only 1 to 3 years. $1 billion spent on the military creates an average of 75,000 jobs. The same amount spent on education creates 187,000 jobs. Job loss is a myth. We're told the check is in the mail. We're going to have to wait for the dividend, we're told. The truth is that things have gotten so bizarre in the world of defense spending that many members of Congress and companies in contract with the Defense Department don't want to stop defense spending because they're reaping benefits. And these people hold power in our current political system. For decades, Congress has used the military budget to award contracts to businesses within the districts of the most powerful senators and representatives. The Pentagon widely dispersed contract awards among congressional districts so as to assure continued support for weapon systems. The result of all this is that even when the Pentagon wants to terminate a weapon system, it's often continued with congressional funding. This is crazy. For example, the V-22 Osprey aircraft was supposed to be terminated in last year's budget, but has been given additional funding of nearly $1 billion this year. The check is not in the mail. It's in the pocket of senators and congresspersons like Conrad Burns, who voted against discontinuing the B-2 stealth bomber and against reducing Star Wars funding. It's in the pocket of defense contractors like Northrop Corporation, who were given $1.8 billion in the 1992 Defense Authorization Act just to build spare parts for a bomber that is supposedly on its way out. Defense spending does not stimulate the economy. Civilian goods create income after their creation, right? Military hardware just sits there until, of course, it's deployed or used in whatever method to kill someone. Even conservative sources say defense cuts are justifiable on security and economic grounds, deep defense cuts. Just a 50% reduction in 5 years would release an average of $310 billion from the defense budget. And it's going to cost $150 billion alone in the next 25 to 30 years to clean up and contain environmental damage caused by the strategic arms race. And who's to say how clean we can actually get it? So let's look at some different figures. 14.7% of all children under 12 in Montana are born into hunger. 16.8% of children under 12 in Montana are at risk of being hungry. This is higher than the national average. Where is the peace dividend? A 1991 CNN poll showed that 86% of those polled would pay more taxes to ensure that poor children in the U.S. got enough to eat and good health care. What about our taxes? Currently, 29% of the taxes collected by the government goes to funding the present military budget. 23% goes to past military costs. 9% goes to the savings and loan bailouts. 2% goes to education. Why? When living healthy and sustainable lives comes in conflict with the government, this is a clue that something is wrong. To grossly paraphrase Hobbes, if the budget is against the people, then the people should actively oppose the budget. Let's demand to see the peace dividend. Let's take action to let Conrad Burns, George Bush, and all the other clowns in D.C. know how we feel. But let's take action in our own lives, too, to create a society that is not militarized. Let's not buy war toys. Let's learn how to listen. For God's sake, let's learn about the history and the culture of the Middle East so we know who we're listening to. Let's set an example. Over 31% of all children in Montana are hungry or are at risk of being hungry. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys in this country will be sexually abused before they turn 16. If current logging rates continue, all the old growth forest in the Northwest will be gone in less than a decade. Thousands of children in the Los Angeles area have permanent lung damage due to pollution by the age of 10. 75,000 children under 15 dead in Iraq due to last year's war. The Cold War structure of the military establishment remains virtually unaltered. Let's do something about it. Thank you.
My name is Mary Thorndike, and I work at Women's Place, and I was asked to speak about women's issues and to look back on the last year since we stood here together 1 year ago on Martin Luther King Day, and to think about what's happened for women in the last year. When I started looking back, I remembered that my strongest memory of the war was what it felt like to stand here in front of Main Hall 1 year ago, united as the progressive community in Missoula, united in our conviction that violence is wrong, united in our belief that killing people is not an appropriate way to solve problems. And when I think about what I've spent the last year doing, and what many other women at Women's Place and in this community have spent the last year doing, I realize that my anti-war work isn't over. I've spent the last year working against the war against women. This is a war going on all around us, in our living rooms, in our bedrooms, in our streets, on our campuses. Last year, nearly 4,000 women were killed through domestic violence. 4,000 women in this country murdered by husbands, boyfriends, lovers, fathers. Every 5 years, the death toll from domestic violence equals the number of Americans killed in the Vietnam War. This is indeed a war against women. More than 95% of the victims of domestic violence are women. Domestic violence is the single largest cause of injury to women in this country. This is indeed a war. And this war isn't usually brought to us by special correspondents on CNN. Most of what we saw in the media this year in terms of coverage of the war against women was either the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas trial hearings, or the William Kennedy Smith rape case. In both situations, a woman accused a powerful and well-known man of sexual violence. In both cases, she was called crazy, she was called delusional. It was implied that she must have wanted it or asked for it. It's these attitudes, it's this climate of denial, of blaming the victim, of disbelief, that allows this war to continue almost unnoticed in our midst. And it is happening in our midst, in our very own community. Jo Riley was a victim of this war when she was shot and killed in the parking lot of the Southgate Mall by the husband that she thought she had escaped 6 weeks earlier. Sheila Eisnogel was a victim of this war when she was beaten to death and burned in her van by the husband she had divorced and had repeatedly sought protection from through the courts. Nancy Lagerquist was a victim of this war when she was kidnapped from her nursing home, brutally raped, and murdered. In the last year, between the time when we stood here in front of Main Hall and today, Women's Place has received more than 1,000 calls from women in our own community, women who've been raped, who've been beaten, women who've been abused or brutalized in some way. Many of these women fear for their lives. And as I look ahead and think about where I'll be 1 year from now, I know that some of these women will die. And some of these women will become the Sheila Eisnogels or Jo Rileys of 1992. As a community, we need to stand together united against this war. We raised our voices loud and clear. We stood strong, we stood firm against killing people in Iraq and against the death of our own American soldiers. We need to remember that our work as anti-war activists is not done. That prisoners of war and veterans of war walk among us today as battered women, as rape survivors, as survivors of child sexual abuse, as survivors of violent assault. We need to remember those who did not survive. We need to raise our voices in protest, and we need to say that together, someday, we shall overcome.
Good afternoon. I really wish that I didn't have to come here today. I wish that every time they had to speak out against racism, speak out for social justice, speak out concerning people of color, blacks, Native Americans, I wish that they didn't have to come and get me. I have other things to do that I would like to be doing. I wish that by January 15th, 1992, we didn't have to do this. And I would hope that a year from today, around January 10th, they didn't have to call me up and say, Woody, would you come talk about social justice? I wish that a year from now, they could call me up and tell me that racism in the state of Montana had been eradicated. But I've been giving these talks for nearly 20 years since my involvement with the American Indian movement on campus here in 1972, the fall of 1972. So I don't have any great hopes that it's going to go away soon. All you can hope for is that maybe out of a crowd of 100 people here out of a campus population of over 10,000, that maybe there will be one man who will break loose, maybe write a book, give a speech, convince a bunch of people that, you know, there is something wrong. And I look at you white people, and I've read your Bible. You beat my people to death with that Bible when you come here. And Christ told you when he walked this earth that this earth is the domain of the devil. We understand things in the same way the native does. We always have, that there is good and evil on this earth, and you have that road to choose, that there are only two roads on this earth, and one is good and one is bad. And this country is driven by money and by liquor. And for many years I walked those roads. I wanted to be rich, and I used a lot of liquor, and I abused a lot of people, until I went back to my native beliefs and began to see that some of these things that the old people talk about are true. 2 years ago, I was in Washington, D.C., testifying on the Montana Wilderness Bill, and I stood at the top of the steps of the Lincoln Monument where Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. And I remembered the pictures of the 250,000 people standing before him. And that's quite a few years ago. But I know the racial violence that is happening in the cities today, the racial violence that is happening on campuses today. And like I say, I don't offer much word of hope to you. All I can do is ask you to search your own soul as to who you are. Not as a moneyed being, but as a spiritual being, and come to those conclusions yourself. Thank you.
My name is Gabby Barrett, and I feel really honored to be able to be speaking with all of you today. And it's hard, I think, to feel connected to life around us these days when we look at all the abuse and the death and the war that we're talking about. And it seems pretty surreal most of the time when you think about a war where people are killed with computers and whole ecosystems that are being destroyed because they're gridded on a computer and plotted out, and it just gets too weird to really comprehend. And it's also hard not to feel like a hypocrite, essentially. And we're fighting a war. I feel like I'm fighting a war. There's no doubt about it. And I feel that the battle is raging to keep the sanctity of life alive right now. The battle is raging to keep our wild places still wild. And it's so bizarre for me to stand here, you know, in my plastic coat and plastic shoes and drive my plastic car around. And, you know, my issue is trying to keep these oil and gas men out of the Rocky Mountain front. And I say, get your dirty gloms off of there, I'm going to kill you. You know, so you feel pretty hypocritical. But those feelings are there, and, you know, essentially I'm a nonviolent person and semi-rational, so I just drive around and try and talk to people about my issue of concern, which is Blackleaf Canyon on the Rocky Mountain front. And it's imperative that we see what our consumption, or what our government and our society tells us is for us, is doing to some of the last, most intact, diverse, and unique ecosystems on the planet. The place I'm working on, the Blackleaf Canyon, is on the Rocky Mountain front, just south of the Badger II Medicine, and bordering the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And pretty much all the species that you envision living in North America once are essentially still there, except maybe the bison. You've got wolves and grizzlies still coming out on the plains. You've got peregrines. You've got bald eagles. You've got lynx and wolverine and pine marten and bighorn sheep and huge herds of elk and deer. And you've also got some pretty ancient and very important cultural native people sites there. The Old North Trail runs along the east front of the Rockies, and that's the one where people who came across the Bering Strait, you know, headed south down to Mexico, and then that trail was used by native peoples for a long, long time. And what's happening is that the BLM pretty much wants to go in there and put in 18 gas wells, a number of miles of roads, pipelines, power lines, you name it. And essentially what we're dealing with here when we're getting into talking about national security and the need for developing our domestic resources is that pretty much, national security means we can pretty much do anything then. If we're talking about going into the last intact and most diverse ecosystems left, like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, like the Badger 2 Medicine, like Blackleaf, and now there's a new plan on the Rocky Mountain front down by Rogers Pass where they want to put in wells in 3 roadless areas. These areas are buffers to the last wild places on the planet, essentially. So, what's next? I'm scared to ask. If this is where we're at now, there's no place left to go, essentially. And Paula Gunn Allen writes, "There's a great survival value of alertness, awareness, and connection to others. That connectivity and kinship to all of life around us is a great source of power for us." So we are warriors in a sense, but we're warriors for life, and I think we need to distinguish what that is. And in order to do that, we need to change ourselves within. We need to combat despair and complacency and fear and general overwhelmedness of what's happening in the world. And we need to be totally active and alert and aware. And that can mean letting your car rust if you want. That's great. But it can also mean doing something so simple as writing an appeal, talking to people about this, because war and death isn't just happening with our species. It's happening with all of life. So if you're involved in doing some work on the Rocky Mountain front, you can contact the Badger chapter or talk to me. We need your help. And I thank you all for being here.
Hi, my name is Judy Smith. I'm from the Women's Opportunity and Resource Development that works with low-income folks in their attempts to become economically self-sufficient. I want to thank you for inviting me today. To me, in some ways, Martin Luther King's birthday is a really important personal commemoration. I was raised as a Southern white kid for a lot of my life, and one of the most important things that happened to me was to have the opportunity to be a part of the civil rights movement and to have someone like Martin Luther King able to talk to people like me and to other white folks like me in the South to say, this is something that we're going to do together. This is something that we can be committed to. And I appreciate the invitation of the first speaker about the Black Student Union. When I was in school back in Boston in the 60s, I joined something that was called CORE. And it was a really unique experience for me to be the one white person in a black person's meeting. So if you've never had that experience, let me really encourage you, even if you're the only white person at a BSU meeting, or maybe there's one or a few more of you. It's an experience that I think you have to have before you really understand what it's like to be a minority person and to be facing the possibility of trying to make change from that position. I want to talk just a couple of minutes about my perceptions here, and then I want to encourage a different, perhaps, kind of action. I think rather than listing all the things that are wrong, and I can certainly do that, and I'll do some of it, I want to move us a little beyond that and talk about some of the things I think we can do here in Montana. And one of the reasons I choose to live in Montana, it's a very conscious choice, sometimes I really think about how conscious that is that there are actions that we can take that I think influence government here more than perhaps sometimes we're aware of it. And one of the things that I think as students often enough we lose sight of is that students in Montana have much easier access to government decision making perhaps than any other state in the country. And if you all have some particular things that you want to accomplish, using that particular access is a very important strategy. But first let me say a couple of things about poverty. Again, not to list it, but I think one of the most important things to keep in your mind that's happened basically in the last number of years is that poverty has radically increased in this country and in Missoula as well. I work with folks every day who sleep outside along the river. Those folks basically are offered as a way of minimizing supposedly their poverty something like $200 a month for 4 months of the year. That's all we offer people who are on general assistance in this state. Other than that, we tell them at the end of that time period, you're gone, go find something else to do. I could tell you stories about what those people do find else to do, but that's our response to individuals who are poor. To families who are poor, we offer something called AFDC, which is aid for dependent children, but basically we offer that at 42% of poverty. In other words, if you're a poor person in this country, you're supposed to be able to have a certain amount of money just to qualify as poverty. We offer people 42% of that to be able to live here in Montana with a family. Well, if any of you have tried to find housing recently in Missoula, and I know a number of you had since you're students, you know how hard it is to find any kind of low-income housing. So imagine yourself as a single mom with several kids with 42% of poverty trying to find a house in this town. A lot of times people absolutely have to pay 100% of their AFDC benefit for housing. We have a number of women who will come to us and say that even spending all of their AFDC on a house, they are unable to find a place to live, particularly if they have 2 or 3 kids. So what poverty is like here is basically having almost no resources and have to spend all of your time on survival issues. And I would say that's basically what is happening more and more to Montanans and to people in general in this country. If you listen to the news, certainly the discussion from New Hampshire, what we're hearing over and over again is a total focus on survival issues. It is getting more and more difficult to find the resources to have a reasonable life in this country. Now, I have all sorts of reasons why I think that's true. I have all sorts of reasons of things I could say we could do about it, but rather than spending a great deal of time there, let me say this. The most important thing in my mind is to have an alternative. We can go around and say Bush is whatever words we want to use. We can go around and say that the ruling class is whatever words we want to use. But the issue is the average American person has to see something else that they can do. And when the average American person sees no hope for themselves except perhaps losing their job within the next year, of course there's an increase in the kind of attitude that does what is happening. And I'm going to say these things because I find them very abhorrent. We are cutting off welfare across the nation. If you have paid attention to what they've done in Michigan, they have basically said $0 for poor people. We are getting rid of general assistance. Believe me, that could happen in the next legislative session here in Montana. We would say we are giving no money to people who cannot take care of themselves. You may have heard in New Jersey, they just passed, or basically the legislature passed, we'll see if the governor vetoes it or not, a bill that says any woman on AFDC who has another kid loses her AFDC. And interestingly enough, the large percentage of people who are on AFDC, again, are single women, heads of household, and most of them in New Jersey, to a large degree, are people with no education, no work experience, and basically what they're being told is if you have kids, we're not going to give you any money. I think that very likely can come here to Montana. In fact, the argument I've been hearing is that states are waiting in the wings to hear if that is declared constitutional in New Jersey. And if it is, many, many states want to say that's going to happen in our state. Why? Because in some ways, the middle class feels so scared about them having a job the next year that they're willing to say, we're spending no money on poor people. Poor people just have to take care of themselves. And I'll give you an example of how that almost happened here during this legislative session in Montana. There was a discussion that was floated, believe it or not, by Democrats, not just Republicans, about cutting that 42% of poverty down to 39% of poverty, saving a whole $2 million for the budget crunch here, and meaning that a lot of the women couldn't literally have a house to live in with their kids. A lot of times, to my amazement, I talk to people who will say, you know, the problem with the budget is people on welfare. And when you try to talk to people about what that means, about the real expenses that are going on, and the fact that most of the government expenses right now go to things like defense spending, much less going to things like AFDC, you begin to realize once again that these intellectual priorities we talk about have to become people priorities. So I have a suggestion, as I say, one most important thing to do. I think there's a real opportunity for those of you who care about issues like this to be involved in the government decision-making here in Montana. I do it. I go over to the legislature. It's not my favorite activity, but I go over to the legislature and I spend a great deal of time organizing other people to go and say, this is not okay with me. I want to live in a state where we take care of people who can't take care of themselves for whatever reasons. I'm not willing. I'm a taxpayer. I own property. I want to pay more taxes if it means that. I'm not willing in my name for you to say people who have low income, we're not going to deal with you. Get a bus ticket, leave the state. More and more people have to be willing to stand up. I'm a taxpayer. I want my money to support programs that mean something to people who have needs. And so I would encourage you, one of the things that's happening here is your tuition is going to go up, and I know it hurts all of you. But I have over 70 women in my program who are coming to this campus as a way to become economically self-sufficient. They will not be able to pay that tuition. And so one of the things that's most important in my mind is for people, those of us who perhaps have some other resources and other possibilities, to say, it's not okay with me that people who are low income all of a sudden are jerked off this system. And that we are going to provide resources for them so that they can have adequate, reasonable lives. So if nothing else, during this next campaign, and there are some interesting people running for governor, if nothing else, ask those people what they're going to do about welfare. Ask those people what they're going to do about poverty. And if they won't tell you that we can do something about poverty, that there are programs now that are tried and true right here in the state of Montana, then don't vote for them. And more importantly, work against them. Because I think the most important message we can give now about poverty and about the issues that I've been discussing today is that we know what to do about them. It isn't a matter of throwing money after problems. Many of us who work in the social services are very clear that there are programs that will work to get people out of poverty. Don't ever believe that the 60s and 70s didn't work. Poverty went down every single year in the 60s and 70s. It's gone up every single year in the 80s. There's direct correlations. So again, in commemoration of Martin Luther King and this other activity that happened last year, which did so many things and damaged so many people, but interestingly, we don't hear a whole lot about anymore, and that was the Gulf Massacre. In the light of all of these things, I would simply say, pick something to do. Take an alternative. Take a goal and make it happen. That is the one way, I think, that we all persist and make things different. Thanks.
We're almost done, guys. There's me, and then there's one more person. So you're really astounding. And all these people standing out here in the winter, bob up and down, jump up and down a little bit, wave your hands, You're astounding. Anybody tell you the war's over? My name is Bill Chalupka. I teach political science here at the university, and I just want to say the organizers invited me to speak, and I'd just like to say a couple of things. A year ago, when we were talking about the Gulf War, and when the legislature was finally beginning to move toward instituting a King holiday, I suppose I was shocked and stunned that Bush would set his deadline on Martin Luther King's birthday. It was an astounding act for him. It depressed and outraged me no end. At this distance, it is easier to comprehend, understand, and live with. After all, King was moving toward an overt anti-war stance when the pressure from the right wing increased so much that he was assassinated. It was the notion that these issues that all of these excellent speakers have spoken about, it was when the notion that those issues might cohere and come together and really form a group between blacks and whites and men and women and people interested in the environment and poor people. That was the threat, ultimately, that led to King's death. So, in retrospect, if there's not complete sense made here, at least it's easier to take now than it was a year ago. I stood listening to all these great speakers wondering, what the hell am I doing here today? It's cold outside. There's not an immediate war to protest, and I hate commemorations. And by and large, commemorations are the short form of history that people impose on us. I would like our moments of protest and anger and expression to be wittier and funnier and more engaging than the commemoration. So let's make this the last commemoration and move on and do something else. But it was such an astonishing year, and the issues are so important that it's a reasonable thing for us to do. I'm not going to fight with these people coming out of this door. I'm going to leave it to our last speaker. Thank you.
Should I give him some time to get out? Here it is. Boy, what a difference a year makes. Last year I stood here and looked out at a sea of 3,000 faces. And this year, there's enough of us left to still be concerned about the issues that brought us together last year. I want to remind you, as I said last year, that Martin Luther King Jr. was a man of faith. He found hope and liberation and freedom in the words of Jesus. It is unfortunate, I think, that in some ways the words of Jesus have now been taken as a battering ram to beat people up beside the head. That's not how all of us see him. It's certainly not how Martin Luther King saw him. And Martin Luther King also found hope and courage and peace in the words of the prophets. Last year at one of the memorial services held on the Oval during the Persian Gulf War, I read from the prophet Isaiah. I want you to hear these words again because they are words of hope. They are words not of Operation Desert Shield. They are not the words of Operation Desert Storm. They are the words of Operation Desert Bloom. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. And the glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, and the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. Therefore strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees, and say to those who are of a fearful heart, be strong and do not fear. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. The lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless will sing for joy. And waters shall break forth in the wilderness, and there will be streams once again in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground will become springs of water. Isaiah's language is symbolic and flowery, but those are the kinds of words that we need to hear once in a while. Because from every speaker that we've listened to this afternoon, we know that we've got a long, long, long way to go. There's still poor in this country, and the number of poor are increasing. We still aren't very good, really, at human rights. We still think that it's okay to beat up the people that we don't agree with. It's okay to bash gays. It's okay to rape women. It's okay to send the homeless packing. And we've got a long way to go. But we can't give up hope. And that's what Martin Luther King encouraged us to do, is to have hope. And just like Des said at the very beginning, his dream must become ours now. And if it isn't, next year, as Chalupka said, we'll be back here again. And I don't want to be. And so I've been asked to close this gathering. And so instead of standing there freezing and beating your feet against the sidewalk, why don't you come in a little closer and get some warmth from each other? Let us be human in this coldness and hold each other's hands. Let us remember with this hope before us, as we remember Martin Luther King, let us remember the victims of oppression who are not only here but everywhere. Let us remember the soldiers on both sides who died in the Persian Gulf War. Let us remember the victims of sectarian strife in Northern Ireland and Croatia and Serbia, Georgia, Russia, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. Let us remember the innocent victims, old men and women and children who had hopes and dreams just like we do, families who have suffered and continue to suffer because of the Persian Gulf experience. But before we leave here today, let us also remember and rejoice and still have hope in the possibilities that lie yet ahead of us for peace, for justice, for equality, for brotherhood and for sisterhood, for the hope that still lies ahead of us, that we can claim that we'll take better care of our home, this planet Earth, and that we'll learn someday to beat our swords into plowshares and learn to feed each other. Peace to all of you, my brothers and sisters.
Stop me before I kill you. Stop me before I kill you.